In America, an average of $100 billion worth of clothes wanders into the trash every year. To put this number into concrete terms, a garbage truck full of textiles goes to waste every second. Donation boxes all around the world are becoming overflowing. They don't fit into the warehouses of sorting facilities, and places like Ghana's Kantamanto market are becoming unable to process what the West no longer cares about or wears. I'm asking that most important question. Well, while there are so many clothes, why can a pair of secondhand pants be offered for sale for $95? The answer is not in the economics of supply and demand. The answer is in our brain's reaction to scarcity and in a marketing system that uses this reaction in a highly conscious way. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but this system is called the vintage economy. And this video is about exactly how this system works, how it takes over our brains, and how much damage it actually does to our wallets. My name is Charlie, and I have been examining people's relationship with money in detail for a long time. And I can say this: the most expensive things you buy are not always the ones carrying the highest price tags, but the ones made by making you feel good. In the America of the 1980s, secondhand shopping carried a certain social meaning, and this meaning was very different from today's. Charity shops were truly there for those in need. Garage sales were high because this was where people got rid of their extra belongings. The word vintage was mostly a word used only for wine. In that period, buying a second-hand product was something preferred by people who did not have the budget to buy a new product. It had a social stigma. It was truly cheap as a price because everyone was aware that this was a matter of need. Then, two things changed at the same time. First is the fashion industry. This quickly drove production costs down so much from the 1990s onwards that when you wanted to buy a new t-shirt, you could buy it for $4. The bad effect of this abundance was the excessive increase in the amount of textiles flowing into donation centers. In the early 2000s, secondhand stores in America could no longer put all the incoming donations on the shelves. The excess began to be exported first to bulk sellers, then to developing countries. Supply literally approached infinity. Second, the sustainability movement gained strength, and the young generation with rising consumer awareness began to move away from fast fashion brands. When these two trends came together, a very interesting gap emerged: an incredibly abundant product pool and millions of consumers who want to attach a different meaning to these products. Right at this point, the concept of vintage gained its meaning today. And this transformation became one of the most successful reframing operations in marketing history. I want you to think for a moment. The same product comes out of the same sorting facility, but if a thrifted label is stuck on it, it looks cheap. If vintage curated is stuck on it, it looks prestigious. Even though the product remained the same, the label changed. The value of this label jumps from tens of dollars to hundreds of dollars. Behind this relabeling process, there is a very conscious market strategy. A group of sellers and platforms, seeing the consumer demand created by the sustainability movement, noticed a way to present secondhand products as a luxury experience. Store designs changed. Photography aesthetics changed. The language used in their advertisements changed. A jacket coming from a waste facility was now being listed as a carefully sourced 90s archive piece. In 2010, the global secondhand clothing market was $11 billion. In 2023, this figure reached $197 billion. Instead of decreasing, the supply showed an increase, but prices also increased along with it. How is this mathematically possible? The answer is perception management in one word. And understanding the tools of this management is the first method of protecting yourself from them. Now, I will make it easier for you to understand this better by giving an example. Rita is 28 years old, works in the field of digital marketing, and earns $62,000 annually. She thinks she's a conscious consumer. She doesn't shop from fast fashion brands, gives importance to sustainability, tries to lower her environmental footprint. And secondhand shopping is where these values are embodied. Rita shops from vintage or secondhand platforms an average of 2 times every month. Sometimes a jacket, sometimes a bag, sometimes small home decoration pieces. In every purchase decision, she has the same calculation in her mind. If this product were new, It would have cost much more. I'm both saving and contributing to the environment. Now, let's look at the real math of this habit of Rita's. Last year, Rita spent $2,840 on secondhand platforms. Inside this figure, there is a $340 jacket, there is a $180 bag, there is a $95 sweater, there is a $220 table lamp, and dozens of small pieces. While buying each of them, Rita was in the same feeling. I'm finding something valuable at an affordable price. I'm staying outside the system. I'm acting wisely. But let's look at the past of that $340 jacket of hers. It came to a sorting facility as a donation, was uploaded to the platform by a selective seller by sticking a vintage 90s label on it, and was sold to Rita for $340. When that jacket came to the facility as a donation, its value, meaning the cost the seller paid, was most likely between $3 and $8. $340 minus $8, $332. Where did this money go? It didn't go to the real value in the jacket, it went to the story stuck on it. Now, let's come to the opportunity cost, because the real pain is here. Let's visualize in our minds that Rita directed half of her annual $2,840 vintage spending, meaning $1,420 of it, to an investment account. With a historical 8% compound growth, this accumulation would have turned into approximately $48,700 in 15 years. Rita did not squander this money. She spent it thinking she was saving. But the return she missed out on was a growth she gave up on silently. And let's take this one step further. If Rita hadn't done vintage shopping, what would she have bought? Most likely she would have bought much fewer pieces to use for a much longer time. Research shows that secondhand platforms increase an ordinary clothing budget, not decrease it. The feeling of "I found it cheap" triggers more purchase decisions. Rita is not aware of this either. In behavioral economics, this is called the licensing effect. When you take a good decision in one area, the brain allows for freer spending in another area. When Rita shops vintage, she feels responsible, and this feeling of responsibility makes it easier for her to justify eating something more expensive at a restaurant that same evening, or entering another shopping site that weekend to just look. The overlapping effect is invisible, but real. Rita spent $2,840 annually, but this figure is the price of every saving decision, every responsible choice that belongs to her, and in none of those decisions did she feel like she was wasting. On the contrary, she came out with the feeling of having done something good after every shopping trip. At this point, I need to emphasize something very important. Rita was completely well-intentioned while taking these decisions. Her values are real, her concerns are acceptable, her intention is clean. But the brain does not distinguish between good intentions and bad decisions, because the mechanisms producing these decisions work much deeper than intention. The loss aversion theory put forward by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky decades ago says this: people feel the pain of a loss approximately twice as strongly as the happiness given by an equivalent gain. And this asymmetry turns into an extremely strong buying urge when a perception of scarcity is created. The language used by vintage platforms exploits this perfectly. Last one item. You won't find it again at this price, only today, from a selected collection. Each of these are triggers that activate the brain's loss aversion system. And when the brain receives these signals, the rational evaluation mechanism slows down. The instantaneous buying urge accelerates. Now, let's look at the truth. Hundreds of the exact same of that last one item product are currently sitting in a sorting facility somewhere in the world. Scarcity is not in the product itself, but in the perception created by the label stuck on it. The brain does not see this difference because it does not have the knowledge to see it. Psychologist Russell Belk's extended self theory says that people encode the objects they possess as a part of their identities. The more unique an object looks, owning it becomes such a strong expression of identity. Vintage marketing sells exactly this. When an ordinary secondhand jacket becomes a curated vintage piece, the person buying it is not just buying a jacket. They are buying the identity of someone who is outside of mass production, has an original choice, and has high cultural awareness. And this identity purchase produces an extremely strong reward response for the brain. Most of what Rita felt when she bought that $340 jacket was this identity update. Not finding a beautiful jacket, but positioning herself as a conscious consumer who stays true to sustainability values and remains outside the fashion system. And this feeling is real. But $340 does not really need to be paid for this feeling. There is a phenomenon known as the decoy effect, meaning the bait effect in behavioral economics. When expensive alternatives are consciously left next to a product, the medium-priced option starts to look much more reasonable. This effect finds a place in the vintage market very subtly but very effectively. When you search for a similar jacket on a platform, different options for $600, $450, and $340 appear before you. When the brain sees this comparison, it naturally finds $340 appropriate. But the question it doesn't ask is this: how much would a new jacket cost for this purpose? Or what is the real production cost of this jacket? When the comparison is made entirely within the vintage ecosystem, the reference point shifts. The moment you enter the system, you evaluate according to the system, and the price logic of the system pulls you in. I want to give an example with regret. They don't jump when you put the frog in boiling water. Because the temperature increases slowly, it doesn't notice the danger. This metaphor is used to describe our blindness to gradual changes, and the course of vintage prices in the last 10 years is a wonderful example of this metaphor. In 2012, a secondhand denim jacket was sold for an average of $8 to $12 in a large secondhand store. In 2018, this figure rose to $25 to $40. In 2024, the same product is priced between $85 and $150 on vintage platforms. Supply never decreased. On the contrary, every year millions of new denims flow into the world's sorting centers. But the price increased approximately tenfold in 10 years. This increase was never sudden. A little more every year, a little more every season. The brain cannot encode this gradual change as a threat because every new price is slightly above the previous one, and this slightly looks acceptable. But the table is very different when the accumulation of 10 years is looked at. Rita could have bought the jacket she bought for $340 today for $25 in 2012. The $315 in between is not price inflation, it is marketing value. And this value is saddled onto Rita's well-intentioned sustainability concern. Let's visualize someone else at the same age as Rita, at the same income level, with the same values. Caroline is 28 years old, works in a similar job, and she also doesn't shop from fast fashion brands. Her concerns about sustainability are almost the same as Rita's, but she has a different perspective on secondhand shopping. Caroline allocates a clothing budget twice a year, and in this budget, she only asks herself this question: would I wear these clothes at least once a week for at least 3 years? If the answer is yes, she buys it. If no, she doesn't. Whether it is secondhand, new, or vintage is a secondary criterion. Not the price tag, but the usage calculation is essential. Rita spends $2,840 annually. Her closet is overflowing with new pieces every season, but 38% of her clothes were never worn last year. This statistic is not unique to Rita. According to research, average Americans keep 40% of the clothes in their closets almost without ever wearing them. Caroline spends $1,200 annually and has fewer but more used pieces. The $1,640 in between is transferred to an investment account every year. A very important point needs to be underlined here. Caroline is not forcing herself to spend less. She is not suppressing her consumption urges with her willpower. She has just tied her purchase decisions to a different question. Rita asks the question, is this beautiful and affordable? Caroline asks the question, am I really going to use this? These two questions cause very different answers in front of the same product, and over time this difference in answers accumulates. When Caroline wanted to take something from the closet last winter, every piece she took in her hand had a story. She knew when she bought it, where she wore it, why she loved it. When Rita did the same movement, she couldn't even ask the same question for half of the closet. Look at the table of this difference 15 years later. The $1,640 that Caroline directed every year turned into approximately $56,200 in 15 years with 8% compound growth. Rita spent $42,600 only on clothes in the same period, and most of it sits in her closet almost without ever being worn. Both were well-intentioned. Both carried sustainability concerns. Both thought they were saving. But one was truly saving. The other was feeling like she was being thrifty. We always asked a wrong question while approaching secondhand shopping. The question was, how cheap is this product compared to its original price? This question means surrendering your reference point to the system, because the moment you make the comparison within the vintage ecosystem, the $340 jacket truly looks cheap in your eyes. But this comparison turns into a playground entirely set up by the system. The correct question should be, what does this product add to my life, and how much is it worth paying for this contribution? Asking this question changes everything, because the answer becomes independent of the price tag. And the 3 tests following this question effectively break the vintage trap. First test, cost usage analysis. How many times will I wear this product in the next 2 years? Divide the number of usages by the price. If the cost per usage looks reasonable, the product is truly valuable. If it doesn't look like it, the story is making you buy it. Second test, the exchange test. If this product were gone tomorrow, would I buy a new one at the same price? This question deactivates the fear of missing out. If the answer is no, it means the thing triggering the purchase is not the product itself, but the feeling of scarcity. Third test, the 24-hour rule. When you like a product on vintage platforms, throw it in the cart, but leave without paying. Are you still looking with the same excitement 24 hours later? I'm sure for the vast majority the answer is no, because the dopamine feeding that instantaneous buying urge largely faded in 24 hours, and the product now looks different, you don't want to buy it anymore. The common logic of these 3 tests is this: to create an artificial friction for the brain's buy now urge, and friction often changes the decision. But one needs to be very honest here. Applying these tests sometimes destroys that excitement of the moment. When you wait for 24 hours for the product that says last one item, it can be sold and go. Giving up on buying something to which you gave the answer no when you did the exchange test means giving up on that instantaneous feeling of satisfaction. And the brain records this giving up as a loss. It causes it sadness for a short time. But right here is a critical question. Is that feeling of "I missed it" real, or is it exactly the reaction that the artificial scarcity game wants? Mostly the second one, because the exact same of that product, or a better one, will be offered for sale somewhere else next week. Sorting facilities are not emptying. Vintage platforms are growing. Scarcity really does not exist. We talked about the vintage trap. We talked about artificial scarcity. We talked about buying identity. We talked about price normalization. We talked about how 2 people starting from the same values went to such different places financially. But one thing needs to be underlined especially, and this is perhaps more important than all of them. This video was not made to badmouth secondhand shopping. Buying secondhand can truly be a better choice in terms of the environment. Truly good opportunities can be found. Truly valuable pieces can be reached with reasonable prices. Of course, there can be a fashion for this. All of these are true. The problem is not in the secondhand, but in the framing of the secondhand as saving. Because real saving is made not when you spend, but when you don't spend. Didn't you know it like this too? And the feeling of "I found it cheap" mostly normalizes spending more, not decreasing it. It is very enlightening to see this with numbers. A research conducted in America shows that 52% of consumers who start secondhand shopping increase their total clothing expenditures. So, for most people, secondhand does not replace fast fashion. It is added on top of fast fashion. The feeling of "it's cheap anyway" lowers the spending barrier, and the closet continues to fill up quickly. Only this time the word "sustainable" is included on the label. Rita spent $2,840 last year and thought she was saving every time. If she continues this shopping habit for 15 years, she will spend $42,600 only in this item and most of it will wait in her closet almost without ever being worn. If she had added half of this money to investment, she would have had an accumulation of approximately $48,700 at the end of 15 years. The difference between the two options is approximately $91,000. $91,000 is the real bill for the feeling of, I am a thrifty person. And this bill is not just money. Every extra purchase is a closet management problem, a mental load, a decision fatigue, a space problem. As your closet fills up, deciding what to wear when you're going out feels that heavy. Minimalist researchers call this the decision budget. The small decisions you take every day exploit the mental energy you need to spend for big decisions, and decrease it day by day. Every unnecessary item in Rita's closet is a small tax. All of them are invisible, but the accumulation is a reality. And the most insidious side of this tax is that it makes you feel like you are doing something good at every moment of payment, for the environment, for saving, for conscious consumption. But in the end, more spending, a fuller closet, less accumulation. Now, let's leave it in the middle with this question. Open your closet and look at your clothes. You haven't worn in the last 6 months, your accessories you haven't used. What were you thinking and feeling while buying each of them? Most likely you remember that satisfaction feeling of finding a good opportunity very well. Now, calculate the total price of those items and ask yourself, where else could you have used that money? The answer to this question is up to you. We just asked the question. See you in the next video.